Fight fans, fight fans, fight fans. This is Kurt Taville with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning David Haye, Oleksandr Usyk. Get this. David Haye thinks that he would have beaten Oleksandr Usyk. He says, I can see a version where I nail him with a right hand. If I catch him, I will win the fight. If I don't catch him because he's too slick, then I'll probably lose on points. How would you see this fight go? Prime David Haye, prime Usyk. Let's go. Let me counterpunch. I think every fighter sees that perfect shot when they land. You know, you see it, you imagine it, you envision it, you try your best to execute it. If it lands, but you see it. That's very important because somebody like David Haye would be I think a decent challenge for Usyk. Why? Because David Haye has an awkward style and he's also fast, and he's also on his toes. Okay. Yes, he lost to Tony Bellew, and Tony Bellew, of course, was knocked out by Usyk in the 8th round, but that has nothing to do with it. The triangle theory deal does not work in this situation because one guy didn't fight the other guy, so it's still left with two guys that have been not challenged by each other. Okay, so two guys haven't fought. Usyk hasn't fought David Haye. David Haye hasn't fought Usyk. They have both fought Tony Bellew. Okay, so based on Tony's style, he was successful. Well, the question you ask yourself is there any compatibility or similarity with Tony Bellew's style versus David Haye's style? Are they similar? And I have to say no. However, I think David Haye hits harder than Tony Bellew. Even though Tony Bellew can crack, I think David Haye is athletically bigger. I think he has that Anthony Yard-like physique, and I think he carries power. But I do have to warn David Haye, with the punch that he feels that he lands, it has to be one hell of a shot. And I think even if that's the case, what do you feel or what do you see about Oleksandr Usyk that makes you think that he will get hit with that shot? Well, he's got hit with shots with Chaz Witherspoon, Derek Chisora, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Tony Bellew. He's been hit before. And I think what David Haye doesn't realize is, yeah, he's been hit, but I think also he's been able to take the shot. So if David Haye does land the shot that he envisions, will it be enough to take down Usyk? It might stumble. It might buckle Usyk. I think he can with the haymakers, the David Haymakers that he used to throw, because this is in its prime, theoretically, in the prime for prime. But I do think that David Haye is underestimating the chin. Also, Usyk's punching power. Because you ask yourself this question now, speaking of similarities, how about Tony Bellew's punching power compared to Oleksandr Usyk's punching power? Now, we know both of those guys are big boys. They can crack. Cruiserweight to heavyweight, no matter, they can still bang. You know what I mean? There's still bangers in the sport, and they will. And I think both fighters, Tony Bellew and Usyk alike, are very, very underrated with their punching power. And I think David Haye, he's worried about going out on points, but he could end up like Michael Hunter. And I think the Michael Hunter fight probably should have been stopped, because Michael Hunter showed his toughness. He didn't give up. He didn't fall, but he did take too many punches. Okay? In my humble opinion. And I like Michael Hunter, but I think he took too many punches. Well, that could happen for David Haye. Okay, because we've seen him pressured, especially dealing with an injury, an upset loss, 2 times back-to-back from Tony Bellew. Okay, and then Bellew wanted to take on the king of the division, which was Oleksandr Usyk, needless to say, which was his last fight of his career. But if Tony Bellew can pressure David Haye, what makes you think Usyk can't? Okay, and I'm talking about the attributes that both have. You see what I'm saying? That's just like saying if Cunningham gave Tyson Fury hell, what do you think Usyk could do with the similar style or with the same type of ability. And I think Usyk could stop David Haye. And I'm not just basing that off of the fight 2 weeks ago with Daniel Dubois. I'm not even talking about that. What I'm talking about is his ability, because if we're being frank, it will be it could be in the heavyweight division because David Haye was a smaller heavyweight, but he was there. I think it could be a situation where he could get stopped. I don't think it has to be necessary on points, because at that, for David Haye thinking that, or assuming that rather, he's thinking Usyk can't crack. And again, he's an underrated puncher. So I do respect David Haye's honesty, because he's like, look, if I can't catch him, shit, he's probably going to beat me all points. He can probably do worse than that, David. You know what I mean? But anyway, you guys tell me what you think of David Haye stating that he sees the best version of himself beating Oleksandr Usyk in his prime as well. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace!